Welcome to our podcast on Chapter 6. As we've seen previously, we have gotten our developing zygote into an embryonic stage, and that lasted through about week 8. Now we're going to look at an overview of what's happening from the 9th week following fertilization until we get to birth. So this period, which really is referred to as the fetal period, this occurs as the embryo really has distinguished some human characteristics. You can really distinguish humans from other vertebrates, certainly from other mammals. And basically in this fetal period, we have already formed the foundational primordia of all the organ systems that are being formed in the body. So since we have the primordia, the systems are largely in place. It's during this time we're going to see extremely rapid growth of the body. The fetal weight gain is going to be just impressive, especially as we get toward the end of gestation, as we get closer and closer to the time for parturition, which is the term for childbirth. And we can see on the scale that is almost exponential in its growth. Here in orange, we're looking at the extension in length, and we can almost see just a linear relationship between age and week and the length of the embryo. This is crown rump length, but look at weight in green. Here we start out very, very small, and we get to go slowly, but then we almost see this exponential explosion as we approach 32 weeks of development. Here's an illustration that just simply shows going from 9 weeks, where we have a crown rump length of about 5 centimeters, all the way up to and including 38 weeks, where we're at 36 centimeters in growth. Now, you can also see that something else is changing. Proportionally, our body is being reshaped. If you look at 9 weeks, we can say that maybe about half of the mass of the embryo is the head. Well, the head's not going to grow proportionally nearly as much as we see that growth in the rest of the body. So gestational age is very important as we begin to look at how we determine the size, the due date. That's what a lot of parents are really wanting to know. And then what organ systems should have developed at certain times. So gestational age, and typically when we look at gestational age, we're going to start either from the first day of the woman's last menstrual period, the LPM, or we're going to look at this, which basically that's going to be 14 days before conception/fertilization. So counting from that first day of the LPM, that's going to assume 14 days later we get ovulation, 14 days later we get fertilization, and that's going to be our starting point. So we add those 2 weeks there at the beginning. That's what gives us, using this last menstrual period method, we're going to consider clinically gestation to be 40 weeks or 280 days. Now, typically, we're going to see that pregnancy is going to last through 38 to 42 weeks. It's rare that anyone's going to go past 2 weeks after their due date, that 42 weeks. And so that's going to be a term delivery. But we're also going to see that a fetus born prior to 37 weeks of gestation is going to be considered to be preterm. We can actually define this even further as we look at preterm. We have new terms now that actually were just adopted. Moderate preterm is any delivery of a baby from 32 to 37 weeks. Very preterm is 28 weeks to 32 weeks. And extreme preterm delivery is anything before 28 weeks. There's a very slim chance of survival, but still some. And so we have this extreme preterm range. Now, as we look at gestational age, we are looking at essentially what everyone wants to know. Where does my child fall in the average range? Well, you can see the zone that we have in the middle. We have our small for gestational age rate, large for gestational age. So anywhere in the middle is going to be our average rate. And here we have our window of typical delivery around this 40 weeks gestational age. And usually anything before 34, certainly preterm, we're getting into that moderate preterm 32 to 37 weeks. You can see that we're fairly small. This again demonstrates the weight gain that's going to happen in these last couple of weeks. Notice that some of these small for weight babies are going to go from 3 pounds possibly up to 5 pounds. They're going to gain 2 pounds And that's a huge part of their body mass over that same period of time. So that just exemplifies the rapid growth that's happening in this last couple of weeks. Now, this is kind of interesting. Back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, there was a German obstetrician, Franz Karl Nagel, and he had the standard way of calculating his due dates for pregnancy, and this is how he did it, and it is fairly accurate even in today's terms. So basically, you take the estimated date of delivery, the EDD, you also call it the estimated date of confinement for when you're going to be in the hospital, and that's going to be from the first day of the woman's last menstrual period, which we still use that. So you take that, add a year, subtract 3 months, and then add 7 days to that date. I know it sounds like voodoo, but walk through this with me. Here we go. So last menstrual period, in this particular example, May 8th of 2007. So you add a year, May 8th of 2008. You subtract 3 months, February 8th of 2008, and then you add 7 days. So the estimated date of confinement, February 15th of 2008. Well, when you look at our 40-week period now from last menstrual period, 280 days, if you start at May 8, 2007, that calculation comes out to be February the 12th, only 3 days off. So, it's right there. But you can also take Nagel's rule, and you can adjust the calculation, okay, to land on the same day of the week. And again, this is just really cool. So if we use the May 8, 2007, that's a Tuesday, and the calculated date of 15th is on a Friday. Well, if you move that to the nearest Tuesday, guess what date it falls on? The 12th. And that's the same date that we're calculating today. So it's kind of an interesting way to do that. I would simply go last menstrual period, 280 days, which is easier to remember. But it just shows you, even without the technology, this obstetrician came up essentially with this algorithm to determine your estimated date of confinement or the estimated due date. Now, we have a lot of interesting ways that we can further refine these gestational ages and estimated dates, and one way is morphometrics. And so we can do an ultrasound, and many of you have seen these done, but they're going to take certain measurements of the fetus, and they plug this into a computer system that has an algorithm, and for certain lengths, widths, diameters, it's going to predict what the normal range, the average range for this particular fetus would be, and give you, based on all these averages, give you an estimated delivery date. So one of the measures is biparietal diameter. This has to do with the brain. So here, if we look at, in an ultrasound image, we can see the circumference of the skull. And you can see these dotted lines here, just these dots. That's going to be, you're going to draw a line from this point to this point, and the computer is going to measure your biparietal diameter and input that into this computer algorithm to estimate date. Again, looking at a very similar image, now we can find the circumference of the skull. And again, this goes in with the biparietal diameter. There's going to be a ton of measures that we're going to look at, that all of these are going to help lead to a more defined date of estimation based on the size, width, thickness, circumference of these different parts. Here we look at head circumference. We look at birth weight, gestational age, and once again, when we look at head circumference versus gestational age, you can see we practically have a straight line. Now, most of these ultrasounds are going to be happening in this 20 to 28 week window. This is the more appropriate time for looking and determining gender. Certainly, we're looking to see if we have any congenital defects, and we have this nice straight line. So head circumference and these other morphometric measurements are really going to help us determine gestational age, even more so than birth weight, because you see how that changes as we get here toward the end, because the weight goes so much faster. Now, we have the biparietal diameter, head circumference. Now we look at the abdominal circumference. This is where we're developing the liver, the lungs, our intestines, because they have herniated out into the umbilical cord, but we've retracted them and put them back in many times by the time we're doing this. And we'll get to that when we get to digestive system. So many of these morphometrics, we can measure femur length. We can also measure foot length, humerus bones. So here we can see the femur length measure and how they're doing that in an ultrasound. So put all these together, and the computer will tell you what an estimated date of confinement or estimated due date will be for this particular fetus. So that's one way we can tell gestational age. Now let's just sort of look at the steps and the stages that we're walking through. So 9 to 12 weeks, we're growing. And this is really where we're going to see, as we begin to make up this difference between 9 weeks and the 12 weeks, that the head growth is going to slow and the body is going to outgrow the head. Now, by 12 weeks, we're still disproportionate, but we're starting to make up ground. At 9 weeks, you can see that the head is half of the crown rump length. I mean, it's huge. But here you can see 9 to 12 weeks, we are becoming much more proportional in the shape of our body. By 16 weeks, we've just about arrived at that proportion. Here we are at 38 weeks of newborn. We're going to have that nice proportional body to the head measure. So the head starts slowing down between this 9 to 12 week growth. Now, during this 3-week period as well, we're going to have primary ossification occurring in the cranium and the long bones. Now, ossification is where we are forming either from precursor cells, bone, or we're going to form from a cartilaginous template. We're going to begin to form bones. And so that's ossification, and that begins the formation of bone for the skull and the long bones happens in this 3-week period. The forelimbs, which for us will be our arms, are going to reach their final relative lengths by the end of the 12 weeks, proportional to the body, so everything's just going to expand there. We also see erythropoiesis, the formation of red blood cells. Now, this had been a process that was going on in the liver, until about the 9 weeks. But then we're going to see that shift to the spleen. And so at 9 weeks, the liver's doing this job, and by the time we get to the end of the 12 weeks, the spleen has replaced the liver as far as being the erythropoietic organ in the developing fetus. Urine formation. We've got our kidneys formed enough that we're going to be able to produce urine in this 3-week period of time. So you can see by 12 weeks, we have some organ systems that are fully functional. 13 to 16 weeks, we're taking these in sort of 3-week chunks. We're going to see rapid growth, and this rapid growth is proportionally growth. It's going to mostly be the body. And before we looked at that figure where we had the same distance that we looked at the proportion and how the head became smaller and the body became bigger. Well, here we're just looking at size. And so as we look at millimeters, here we are 125, 175, so about 75 millimeters at 12 weeks. 38 weeks, here we are at 500 millimeters. So you can see that very rapid growth. It's going to be almost exponential on the bottom end. See a lot of growth, but our length, we're not going to elongate very much after we get out into these later weeks. That's where we're adding the weight. We're going to put on the pounds toward the end, not so much the length. So 13 to 16 weeks, we're going to see our limb movements. We had, reflexive movements. Well, now we're going to have coordinated movements by week 14. And I know that for many around week 20, 22, 24, it's when parents go in to do the ultrasound to determine gender. It was during that time for my children that you could actually see purposeful arm movements. Babies start to suck their thumb. One of my children, it looked like they were waving their hand. Another looks like they were sort of hitting themselves on the forehead like, man, I should have had a V8. But you could see those purposeful limb movements very clearly in these ultrasounds at 20 weeks. And they begin to do that now we see in 14 weeks. By the end of 15 weeks, you can fully see bones visible in the ultrasound. The long bones, the cranium. Ossification began in 12 weeks, and we're going to continue it and fully form our bones, proportionally speaking, by the end of these 15 weeks. We have slow eye movements that are going to occur at 14 weeks, and you can recognize sex by 12 to 14, but with technology, they really want you to get closer to that 20 weeks. I think some of these 3D, 4D ultrasounds, they may get you in there as early as 15 to 16 weeks. But then again, you have to have a justifiable reason for doing these things, or insurance won't pay for it. Here we are about our 13 to 16 week period. We can very clearly see our embryo, human structures here. We still have a proportionally large head. There's our chorionic sac, that portion of the placenta. Here they call it the amniotic sac, and really what we've got at this point, we've got our amniochorionic membrane. That's all together at this point. We can't separate one from another. So 17 to 20 weeks, we're going to see our growth begin to slow. This is where the mother's going to begin to feel the baby moving. They're called quickenings. I've heard it compared to butterflies in your stomach very early on. Later, there's not going to be any question. You're going to see the baby kicking through the abdominal wall. So that's not going to be an issue. It's fun at first, but later, not so much. Now, the skin, as it's growing, is very delicate. And so there is going to be this protective secretion that's going to coat the body. It's called the vernix caseosa. And vernix caseosa literally means varnish, and caseosa is cheese. So this stuff really does look like cheese. And when you see a baby delivered for the first time in the delivery room, they're nasty. They're covered in the vernix caseosa. They're covered in this white material, amniotic fluid that's starting to dry, blood. In some ways, it's not really a pretty sight when you see a newborn. But when it's your own, it's different. So this varnish cheese-like material, it's thought to prevent the skin from dehydrating in the womb. Do you know how if you've been in the swimming pool or the bathtub, your fingers will prune? That's because the water is being pulled out of your skin. Well, in this case, you're going to be protected. It's almost like a swimmer swimming across the English Channel. They'll cover themselves in some kind of grease. It's just an insulating layer to protect your skin from the fluid. In this case, to protect the fetal skin from the amniotic fluid. Here you can see sort of matted in the hair of this newborn, this white cheese-like material. That's going to be some of that vernix caseosa that's still left. And one of the jobs of the attendings in the neonatal area and in the delivery room, they're going to be examining the newborn. They're going to be checking vitals for respiration rate, heart rate, blood gases, the color, but they're also going to be cleaning up the baby to remove a lot of this material. So 17 to 20 weeks, quickenings, we talked about vernix caseosa, but we're also going to see that on the skin, we have this fine downy hair that completely covers the body. It's called lanugo. And this hair is actually going to help to anchor the vernix caseosa and hold it to the skin. And, you know, we've got, certainly we've got eyebrows in this picture. And here you can see matted into the eyebrows. This is going to be some of that vernix caseosa. But then we have small hairs all over the body. You can almost see like the pores here more so that you can see the hairs. And so here we are, 17 to 20 weeks. I mean, there's no doubt what we're looking at is a human fetus at this point. You can even see fingernails. Now we're running out of space. Clearly, as we get into this rapid growth period past 20 weeks, certainly as we get to the late 20s, 30s, but we're running out of space, and we're going to start to bend and twist, and mom's not going to be comfortable. The fetus is not necessarily going to be comfortable, but we still have a long ways to go. 21 to 25 weeks. Here we're taking a month jump. This is 4 weeks. What we're going to see is we have substantial weight gain. This is where the weight's going to begin to be piled on. The blink startle reflex. You know, when you turn a light on real fast, you'll blink or you'll sort of jerk. Those can be observed in fetuses during this time period. Now, think back to fizz and surfactant producing type 2 pneumocytes. Well, that's going to begin here at 21 to 25 weeks, but certainly there is very little chance of survival if born prematurely. This is in the extremely premature range. We simply don't have enough surfactant, and we haven't produced enough alveoli at this point to sustain life in external respiration. 26 to 29 weeks, we're going to see that the spleen has been our production of red blood cells since about 12 weeks. Well, now here, 26 to 29 weeks, the bone marrow is going to take over and sustain you for the rest of your life. 26 to 29 weeks, the central nervous system is not capable yet of controlling your rhythmic breathing and body temperature. We haven't done that yet. We're depending on mom for our external respiration. We're depending on mom to help us maintain our body temperature. So that's another reason with newborn babies, especially premature babies, they're placed into an incubator to keep that warm, and they're not taken out for very long periods of time at all. They're mostly tended to inside this incubator. Now, 26 to 29 weeks, we do have our lungs, we do have our pulmonary vasculature sufficiently developed that they can undergo external respiration. And it's during this period that survival chances are good with intensive care. But the question then is also, do we have enough surfactant produced that this newborn, this premature delivery, we're moving sort of across the extreme and moving into the very, because we're past that 28 here into the 29. The very premature range surfactant. Do we have enough to be independent, or are we going to have exogenous surfactant to help us survive until we can produce more? 30 to 34 weeks, getting down toward the end of the line here, pupillary light reflex occurs. Our body weight is about 8% white fat. And again, this white fat is that storage form of energy. We're not going to get a lot of nourishment there in the first couple of days after we're born. So that white fat's going to sustain us during that period. 32 plus week fetuses usually survive if born prematurely. We're getting into that 32 to 37. That is our moderate preterm that they've just coined that term and established those categories just a few months ago, I believe. So now we're getting into that. Moderate preterm and survival is extremely good. You can see 32, 34, we don't have much room at all. We look like contortionists inside the uterus, and toward the end, the baby's movements are going to slow down just because there's not much room to move. And some moms kind of panic thinking the baby's not moving, the baby's not kicking anymore. Well, there's just not any room. 35 to 38 weeks, slowing of growth is going to occur. The fetus is going to be sleeping 90 to 95% of the time. There's nothing else to do, no room to move, so hey, we might as well sleep, conserve our energy. We're going to need it here in just a couple of weeks. Most have crown rump length of 360 millimeters, and they're going to weigh on the order of 3,400 grams at this point, 3.4 kilograms. Now, white fat, we've doubled it in this period. 16% of our body fat ready to sustain us, again, for those early periods. Here we can just see some newborns, and a lot of newborns, we'll call them chunky monkeys, but a lot of the newborns are born with that white fat, and they will begin to thin up fairly quickly. Remember, the first milk from mom is going to be colostrum. It's going to have IgA. It's going to be mucus. Not a lot of milk protein at first, so that white fat is going to be important for sustaining our newborn for those first couple of days.